Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. I never imagined that a dusty, forgotten suitcase would unravel my entire life. It was a regular Saturday morning. The kids were off at soccer practice, and Allison was prepping for a big meeting in her home office. I was on a mission to clear out the attic, a task she'd been pestering me about for weeks. It was one of those mundane chores you do to keep the peace, until it wasn't. I stumbled upon the suitcase under a pile of Christmas decorations. At first, I thought it was empty or full of old clothes destined for donation. But when I opened it, a wave of confusion hit me. Inside were souvenirs, a snow globe from Chicago, postcards from San Francisco, and a keychain that read Seattle Skyline. Each item bore the distinct mark of tourist traps. But Allison had never mentioned traveling to those cities. She'd never brought back stories of visiting Navy Pier or the Golden Gate Bridge. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe these were keepsakes from a friend or a business gift she'd forgotten to mention. Yet, something about the careful arrangement of the items in the suitcase, each wrapped meticulously, unsettled me. I decided to bring it downstairs. "Hey, Allison," I called out casually. "What's this?" Her reaction was immediate and telling. She froze, mid-typing, and her face paled. "Where did you find that?" she asked, her voice tight. "In the attic," I replied, trying to sound neutral. "It's yours, right? I didn't think you'd been to these places." "Oh, it's just, from a long time ago," she said, fumbling with her words. "Work conferences, you know. I forgot I even kept those." She was lying. I could see it in her eyes, the way she avoided my gaze and shuffled uncomfortably in her chair. Allison was always quick-witted, the type who could talk her way out of anything, but this was different. Her words lacked conviction, and her body language screamed guilt. I didn't push her, not then. "All right," I said, shrugging as if it didn't matter. "Just curious." I put the suitcase aside, but my curiosity had turned into something darker, suspicion. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. The way Allison's phone was always face down on the counter. The hushed tones she used during late-night calls. Her increasingly vague explanations about work trips. It wasn't long before I decided to dig deeper. One evening, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone. I knew her password, it hadn't changed in years, but when I tried to unlock it, I was met with a new code. My stomach churned. Why would she change her password after all this time? I didn't confront her about it. Instead, I decided to check the phone records through our carrier's account. It was easy enough to log in, and within minutes, I was scrolling through her call history. One number appeared over and over again, particularly during the times she was supposedly at conferences. The area code wasn't local. It belonged to Chicago. I copied the number and ran a quick search online. The name that came up was Jeffrey Mitchell. The name didn't ring a bell, but the context made my blood run cold. I vaguely remembered Allison mentioning a coworker named Jeff a year ago, in passing. He was helpful, she'd said, good at what he does. Helpful, indeed. Over the next week, I pieced together a timeline of her supposed work trips. They matched perfectly with the times she had been in contact with Jeff. Hotel receipts, flight confirmations buried in our shared email folder, even innocuous photos she'd uploaded to social media, all of it painted a damning picture. She wasn't attending conferences. She was with him. The moment of clarity hit me late one night, sitting in the dark with my laptop. My wife was having an affair. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The woman I'd loved for over a decade, the mother of my children, had betrayed me. And for what? The thrill of someone new. A man who wasn't tied down by the monotony of suburban life. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to throw the evidence in her face and demand answers. But something held me back. Anger simmered beneath the surface, but alongside it was a cold, calculating resolve. If Allison thought she could deceive me, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. This wasn't going to end with a screaming match and hollow apologies. No, I would bide my time and make her regret every deceitful choice she'd made. As the days passed, I played the role of the oblivious husband. I smiled when she kissed me goodbye, nodded along when she told me about her meetings, and even helped her pack for her next trip. All the while, I gathered evidence, bank statements, hotel invoices, even screenshots of their flirtatious texts that I managed to intercept with a little tech-savvy ingenuity. By the time her next trip rolled around, I had everything I needed. Allison thought she was going to Chicago for another secret weekend with Jeff. She had no idea that I was about to turn her world upside down. The morning Allison left for her conference, she kissed me goodbye as if nothing was amiss. I stood in the doorway with a smile, watching her load her suitcase into the car. She waved as she drove off, blissfully unaware that her lies were about to unravel. As her car disappeared down the street, I closed the door and got to work. First, I called Rebecca Mitchell, Jeff's wife. It had taken me weeks to gather the courage to make contact, but once I had the proof of their affair, I knew it was the logical next step. Rebecca deserved to know what her husband had been up to, and truthfully, I needed an ally. When she answered, her voice was hesitant, as though she sensed bad news was coming. "Hi, Rebecca," I began, my voice steady but cold. "My name is Daniel. I believe our spouses are having an affair." There was silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought she might hang up, but then she spoke, her voice trembling. What are you talking about?" "I've been tracking their movements," I explained. "Allison, my wife, and Jeff. They've been meeting during these so-called work trips. I have evidence." Rebecca's voice hardened. "You'd better not be making this up." "I'm not," I assured her. "I'll send you everything I have. Emails, phone records, hotel receipts. I know this is hard to hear, but I thought you'd want to know." She exhaled shakily. "Thank you for telling me. I don't even know what to say." "How long has this been going on?" "From what I've pieced together, at least a year," I said. "Maybe longer." Rebecca's silence spoke volumes. After a long pause, she asked, "What are you planning to do?" "Expose them," I replied. "But I want to do it in a way they won't see coming. If you're interested, I'd like your help." Rebecca agreed. Over the next hour, we strategized. We would confront them in Chicago, where they thought they were safe from suspicion. The plan was simple but effective: catch them in the act and make it impossible for them to deny their betrayal. Rebecca even suggested we bring a few friends to witness the confrontation, ensuring there would be no escape for Allison and Jeff. With our plan set in motion, I felt a surge of adrenaline. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't wallowing in betrayal. I was in control, ready to reclaim my dignity and show Allison that I wasn't the fool she took me for. That Friday evening, I drove to Chicago, leaving our kids with my parents under the guise of a weekend business trip. The irony wasn't lost on me. By the time I arrived at the hotel where Allison and Jeff were staying, Rebecca was already there. She had checked into a room 2 floors above theirs, bringing along her sister for support. "Room 712, Rebecca whispered when we met in the lobby. "They're up there now. I saw them check in about an hour ago." I nodded. "Do we know what they're doing?" She glanced at her phone, her lips pressing into a tight line. "Jeff texted me earlier saying he was at a work dinner." The liar. We agreed to wait until morning to confront them, giving them a false sense of security. It was agony knowing they were together just a few floors away, likely reveling in their deceit, but patience was key. The night dragged on as Rebecca and I prepared for what was to come. She reviewed her divorce plans, and I ensured that all the evidence I'd gathered was in order. Every text, every email, every receipt was documented and ready to present. By morning, the adrenaline had returned in full force. Rebecca and I met in the hallway outside room 712, our hearts pounding. She knocked on the door, her hand trembling slightly. After a few seconds, Jeff answered, his face shifting from confusion to alarm as he saw Rebecca standing there with me behind her. "Rebecca? What are you doing here?" he stammered, trying to block the doorway. "Move," she snapped, shoving past him. I followed close behind, my eyes immediately locking onto Allison. She was sitting on the bed, her face pale as a ghost. The betrayal was written all over her expression. "Daniel?" Allison's voice wavered. "What are you?" "Spare me," I cut her off, holding up a folder stuffed with evidence. "Don't even try to deny it. I know everything." Jeff looked like he wanted to crawl under the bed. "Look, man, this isn't what it looks like." "Shut up," I barked, my voice louder than I intended. "You've both been lying to us for over a year. Do you have any idea what you've done? To our families? To our kids?" Allison began to cry, her hands trembling as she reached for me. "Daniel, please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," I said coldly. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with the consequences." Rebecca stepped forward, her voice icy. "Jeff, I'll be filing for divorce first thing Monday morning. I hope your little fling was worth it, because you've lost everything." Jeff opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He looked like a cornered animal, panicked and helpless. I turned to Allison. "I'll be doing the same. Don't bother coming home. The locks will be changed before you get there." Her sobs grew louder, but I felt no sympathy. This was her doing, her betrayal. And now, she was paying the price. The confrontation ended quickly, with Rebecca and I leaving them to wallow in their shame. As I stepped into the elevator, a weight lifted from my chest. For the first time since discovering the affair, I felt free. Allison had shattered our marriage, but she hadn't broken me. If anything, she'd made me stronger. And as the elevator doors closed, I realized that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in my life, a chapter where I would rebuild, not as a victim, but as a man who refused to be defeated. The drive home was eerily quiet, the hum of the car engine the only sound breaking the silence. My thoughts were a whirlwind, but one idea rose above the rest: this wasn't over. Catching Allison and Jeff in the act had been satisfying, but now came the hard part, untangling our lives and facing the reality of what she had done. By the time I reached the house, the kids were already asleep at my parents' place, sparing me from having to explain anything, at least for now. I parked in the driveway, the house looming like a monument to the life we'd built together. It felt tainted now, every brick and window a reminder of the lies that had festered within. I stepped inside, the stillness of the empty house enveloping me. A bottle of whiskey beckoned from the cabinet, and I poured myself a glass, sinking into the couch. I needed clarity, a plan for what came next. The next morning, I began taking steps to dismantle the life Allison and I had shared. The first call I made was to a divorce lawyer. Her name was Valerie Knight, and she came highly recommended for cases like mine. "Daniel, you're doing the right thing," she said after I finished explaining my situation. "With the evidence you've gathered, you have a strong case. We'll prioritize securing custody of your children and protecting your assets." "Thank you," I said, relief washing over me. "What should I do next?" "Start by documenting everything, financial accounts, assets, even daily routines involving the kids," she advised. "We'll need it all. And I recommend changing the locks on the house today. Make it clear she's not welcome back." The locks. Of course. The thought of Allison walking through the door as if nothing had happened made my skin crawl. I hung up with Valerie and called a locksmith. By noon, the locks were changed, and I felt a small measure of control returning to my life. Allison arrived later that afternoon. I saw her car pull into the driveway and braced myself. She walked up to the door, suitcase in hand, and paused when her key wouldn't turn. She knocked tentatively, her face pale and drawn. I opened the door but blocked her entry. "Daniel, please, can we talk?" she pleaded, tears already streaming down her face. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, my voice cold. "You don't live here anymore." "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, her voice breaking. "This is my home too." "Not anymore," I said firmly. "You made your choice, Allison. Go stay with Jeff, or wherever else you want. Just not here." Her tears turned into sobs, but I didn't waver. "Daniel, I'm so sorry," she choked out. "I don't even know why I did it. It was a mistake. I love you. Please, let me fix this." "You don't get to fix this," I snapped. "You destroyed our marriage. You betrayed me. There's no coming back from that." Allison's shoulders sagged as she realized I wasn't going to relent. "What about the kids?" she asked weakly. "We'll figure out custody," I said. "But for now, you need to leave." She stood there for a moment, her face crumpling under the weight of her choices. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back to her car. I watched as she drove away, a mix of anger and sadness churning in my chest. This was what she deserved, but it didn't make it hurt any less. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings and difficult conversations. Telling the kids was the hardest part. Emma, my 10-year-old, took it the worst. She cried for hours, begging to know why Mommy wasn't coming home. I tried to explain in the gentlest terms, but there was no way to shield her from the truth entirely. "Mommy made some bad choices," I said, holding her close. "But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. She'll still see you, just not here." Daniel, my 7-year-old, didn't fully understand but sensed the tension. "Is Mommy mad at you?" he asked one night, his big eyes full of worry. "No, buddy," I said, forcing a smile. "This isn't about being mad. Sometimes grown-ups just can't live together anymore." It felt like a weak explanation, but it was all I could manage. Meanwhile, Rebecca and I stayed in touch, bonded by our shared betrayal. She'd already filed for divorce, her lawyer wasting no time in serving Jeff with papers. She called me one evening, her voice weary but determined. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Barely," I admitted. "The kids are struggling, and I'm trying to hold it together for them." "Same here," she said. "But at least we're taking steps forward. Jeff moved out yesterday. He's staying at a friend's place. Any chance he and Allison will end up together?" I asked, the bitterness creeping into my voice. Rebecca laughed humorlessly. "Doubt it. Jeff doesn't handle consequences well. I think he's already regretting everything." "Good," I said. "They deserve to feel every ounce of this pain." Weeks turned into months. The legal process was slow, but the progress was steady. Valerie ensured I retained primary custody of the kids, and we were able to protect most of my assets. Allison fought for more than she deserved, but the mountain of evidence against her made her case weak. In the meantime, I focused on rebuilding. I poured my energy into my work, finding solace in the structure and purpose it provided. I started therapy, something I'd never considered before, and found it surprisingly helpful. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again. One day, as I was cleaning out the garage, I stumbled upon the suitcase that had started it all. I opened it, the souvenirs staring back at me like relics of a life that no longer existed. I considered throwing them away, but something stopped me. Instead, I placed the suitcase on a high shelf, out of sight but not forgotten. It was a reminder, a symbol of betrayal, yes, but also of my resilience. Because while Allison had broken my trust, she hadn't broken me. Months turned into a year. By then, the divorce was finalized, the custody arrangements settled. Allison had moved to an apartment across town, close enough for the kids to visit, but far enough that I rarely had to see her. She tried to repair her relationship with Emma and Daniel, though they remained distant, particularly Emma, who still blamed her mother for the upheaval in our lives. For me, life had found a fragile sense of normalcy. Therapy helped me rebuild my confidence, and work gave me purpose. I even began dating again, cautiously dipping my toes into the idea of starting over. But through it all, there was a lingering question in the back of my mind: why? Why had Allison done it? What had driven her to betray me so completely, to risk everything we'd built together? She'd apologized profusely, begged for forgiveness, but she never truly explained. I'd assumed it was just selfishness, a craving for excitement, but part of me always wondered if there was more to the story. One crisp autumn evening, as I sat in the living room sorting through old photos for a school project Emma was working on, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Allison. "Can we talk? Please. It's important." I stared at the message, debating whether to respond. It had been months since we'd had any real conversation beyond logistics for the kids. Against my better judgment, I replied, "What is it?" "Not over text. Can I come by?" Curiosity got the better of me. I agreed, and 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Allison stood there, looking thinner than I remembered, her eyes tired but determined. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling, "thank you for letting me come." "What do you want, Allison?" I asked, my tone firm but not unkind. She hesitated, then stepped inside. "I need to tell you the truth. About everything." I crossed my arms, leaning against the kitchen counter. I thought I already knew everything. "You don't," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "And you deserve to." Over the next hour, Allison told me a story I never expected to hear. It started with her parents. I'd known they'd passed away when she was young, but I never realized how deeply it had scarred her. "Losing them made me terrified of being abandoned," she confessed. "So, when I started feeling like you were pulling away, working late, always distracted, I panicked." Her voice broke as she continued. "Jeff wasn't about love or even lust. It was about control. About feeling like I could still be desirable to someone, that I wouldn't be left behind." I wanted to dismiss it as another excuse, but her words carried a weight that stopped me. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, placing it on the counter between us. "What's this?" I asked, eyeing it warily. "Proof," she said. "That I'm not just trying to manipulate you." Inside was a thick sheaf of papers, medical records, counseling notes, and a diagnosis. "Borderline personality disorder." The words jumped off the page, hitting me like a freight train. "I've been in therapy for the past 6 months," she said. "I've been working on myself, trying to understand why I did what I did. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Daniel. I want you to know that I'm trying." For the first time in over a year, I saw a version of Allison I recognized. Vulnerable, honest, and broken, but trying to heal. I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded. As she left that night, I felt an unfamiliar mix of emotions: closure, pity, and maybe even a shred of understanding. I didn't forgive her, not entirely, but I no longer felt the sharp edge of hatred that had defined the last year of my life. Weeks later, life threw one more curveball my way. It was a Saturday morning, and I was helping Emma and Daniel carve pumpkins when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Rebecca standing there, looking hesitant but hopeful. "Rebecca?" I said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood," she said, smiling shyly. "And I thought, maybe we could grab a coffee." It was unexpected, but not unwelcome. Over the months of dealing with our divorces, Rebecca and I had supported each other, forming a bond that neither of us had acknowledged out loud. Now, standing on my doorstep, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was room in my life for something new. I glanced back at the kids, who were busy squabbling over pumpkin designs, then turned back to Rebecca. "Give me 10 minutes to get these two settled," I said, smiling. As she nodded, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe the past didn't have to define me. Maybe, after all the pain and betrayal, there was still a chance for happiness. And maybe, just maybe, it had been waiting for me all along.